Okay, this is a porcelain chip, and I will be telling you and showing you how to go about repairing that. Now this is a chip that's back in the back ledge area, but it is nevertheless actually as rough an area for testing material as the bottom of the tub. The only difference is here it doesn't get walked on, but a lot of times people are going to be sitting shampoo bottles and bars of soap on this area. Water will sit there and won't drain off. Now here is the bottom of a tub. It has the built-in texture in it, and the built-in safety bottoms on porcelain tubs are terrible. They are just like an unglazed porcelain tub. They're almost impossible to keep clean. And sometimes you're going to get to fix a chip in the middle of them. Your material is going to come out shiny, and the textured area is going to be dull and rough. And sometimes I just try and match out the curve of the repair area by making it cover up an area that would lessen the size of the original textured area. But other than that, that's about all you can do. Just explain it to the customer. This is an etching cream. This stuff is, it contains molasses, and believe it or not, it does, and a few other things, but the nasty part it contains is hydrofluoric, not chloric, fluoric acid. Very dangerous. Do not get it on your hands, do not get it on your flesh, do not splash it in your eyes. Whenever you're going to have to fill porcelain by putting a plastic filler on it, you will have to etch. And this is the only time I'm going to be saying this. Notice the towel under my feet, because if I stood on that textured area in the bottom of the porcelain tub, it would be difficult to clean out. Now this will be the only time I mention it, but in theory it is possible to not etch porcelain and wipe on or spray on, whatever you want to do, the primer out past the area that you're going to be filling. Mist it and heat it, or add a lot of heat to it. Heat it for about 5 minutes on high from about 8 inches, and then put your filler on it. In theory, that'll lock it in. Testing hasn't shown yet any methods that or anything that would influence that not holding. But I'd recommend you going ahead and testing it yourself under your conditions, but in theory it should work, since the primer will lock a top coat onto the polyester filler. It should also lock the polyester filler onto the porcelain. This is, of course, the white filler with the white BPO, and that can be either Adtex number 14 or LBI's Snow White. Remember, one is cured by BPO, one by MEKP. Now that it was drilled, ground out to make sure all the loose porcelain was removed, and then it was etched and then cleaned with acetone, now the filler goes on. And as I said, in theory you can skip the etching and then just wipe on the primer. Heat it for about 5 minutes, and then put the polyester filler on. And when you sand down the polyester filler, you'll also be removing the primer out beyond the edge of it. But you will be spraying it with primer again, because you'll be wanting to put a top coat on it. camera's having a hard time focusing because there's not a whole lot to afford it contrast. Now this was a chip that had a gouge going off to the side of it there, and that's that thin dark line. I'm speeding up the curing process of the filler by adding heat. On porcelain, I usually use, for the first time around after putting a filler on, nothing heavier than 120. That's because I don't want to put heavy, deep scratches around on porcelain. If I should slip or something, it's impossible to sand and buff out a scratch on porcelain. If I was using 80 or 60 grit on this to knock off the high parts, it would just make the job more difficult. And that's because I'd be worrying about slipping and having to do a scratch repair for 3 or 4 inches. Here I'm cleaning it with acetone in preparation for more filling material. Opening the can of fill-in glaze. And again, this material is filled with a lot of talc. It's very smooth, easy to sand, very creamy. It is not as strong as your number 14 or Snow White, and certainly not as strong as the Type 2 number 11. Or number 11 Type 2, whatever it is of Adtex. But it also will cure twice as fast with half as much catalyst or activator to it as compared to your Snow White and number 14. Cleaning off the spreader with acetone. On larger areas, if you have a large porcelain chip, go ahead and use the 80 or the 60, but on the smaller ones I recommend sticking with 120. If you go back and there's still a tack there, you're going to find that the fillers take quite a longer time to cure on porcelain, cast iron, or steel than they will on fiberglass reinforced acrylics and gel coats. That is because the steel and the cast iron hold cold. They're always going to be fairly cold compared to the surrounding area. And even if they're not cold, they tend to suck the heat out of anything that gets near them. So that's going to slow down the curing process. Now here I've got 120 going over the fill-in glaze. And here I'm probably using a 220 or 320. Doing the same thing with the chip on the bottom. Cleaning the areas off with acetone, preparing for the last coat of filler material. That would be the air dry pit filler number 29. Notice how I have gray tape, duct tape wrapped around the jar, or around the tube. And that's because I don't want anybody in the field knowing what I'm using. Paranoid perhaps, but there will be people out there who would give anything to learn how to do what you do, especially when they see how much you can earn doing it. I usually will not sand unless I really screw up and get a lot of the pit filler on there. I might go to 220 if I do that, but usually the roughest I'll go is 320, and most of the time I work with 400, and that's on the air dry pit filler only. Do not use water with the air dry pit filler. Repeat, do not use water with the air dry pit filler. When you're sanding it, sand it dry. Wiping it off with acetone. Don't want to add too much acetone. It doesn't react well. It tends to remove too much of the air dry pit filler. You can either clean it with acetone or solvent alcohol. Now we're going to, this is an American Standard Americast tub. And what we're going to be doing here, American Standard white, I use Acre white and add a little bit of black and in some cases a smaller amount of yellow oxide. You can start out with China white and add all of your whites can usually be balanced out from China white. If you have to add a little of your pure white, you always want to have some China white and pure white in your repair, your color bucket or tub. If you start out with China white, you can add a blue and red in differing mixtures to get to most shades of white. And like I said, in this case, I was usually using Acre white because that comes out pretty close to American Standard white. But if you don't have it, you can start out with China white and just balance out a little bit of blue and a little bit of red oxide, and you'll get to most every shade of white. The blue and the red together will muddy it up the same as black would do. By muddying it up, it's just making it a little darker shade. Lasco's white has quite a bit of red in it. Kohler's white has quite a bit of blue in it. Acre's white is a little darker. Sometimes you can play around with that by, as I said, adding a little black. And while you're mixing colors anywhere in the field, once you come up with one, remember how you did it and make a note of that and carry it with you, so the next time you come up with that color, you can look in your book and say, gee, I remember mixing that one time, and gee, all you got to do is open up a notebook and there's your notes. Now in repairing porcelain, you'll want the, of course, your top coating material and your top coat converter. And on porcelain, I always use extra amounts of 8595S or a high temp reducer. Here I'm talking to myself or the camera person. Getting the light up so I can see through the 1 ounce plastic cup to make sure I'm adding what I need to add. And again, it's a 6, 1, and 4 formula. You can mix more than the 4 or less than the 4 parts of reducers, but you need to stick with the 6 to 1 base 2 activator. So if you're putting in 3 cc's, you'd put in a half a cc of activator. Because 2 times 3 is 6 and 2 times 1/2 is 1. When I'm doing porcelain repairs, like I said, I usually add a lot of high temp reducer, and then I spray a little bit on and blow air on it, spray a little bit more on and blow air on it until I have it covered. That way your edge isn't as rough. You've got a better blend on your edge that way. And I mean by edge, the edge of the repair where you stop your applying your color top coat. Preparing the surface for top coating by cleaning with a light application of acetone or solvent alcohol. Making sure the trigger works properly. Here I always keep a cap in the repair tub or in with my airbrush with a long tube on it and one with a short tube on it. The one with the long tube I'd use in the 3 ounce cups. The one with the short tube I use in the 1 ounce cups. Now, a little compressor was a little WR Brown compressor that will work adequately, but I much prefer the compressor that I have written on your inventory in the manual. And there's the top coating material coming out onto the piece of cardboard I use as a spreader, or to mix up my fillers. Mixing board. Now I'm going to tack the area. Now you'll see I've got masking up around there so the overspray doesn't get up on the tile. Okay, now this is the primer. What you're going to see here is a case of somebody that's not concentrating on what they're doing, or thinking about something else, or tired, or hungover, or whatever. I put the top coat on and forgot to put the primer on. Actually, the reason I did that was because the tiler who chipped the tub was standing there asking me every question under the sun. And this guy didn't know when to be quiet. So he's got to pay to have me remove the top coat and put the primer on. Again, I am using the dual cartridge half face respirator. You will use the fresh air supplied respiration system. You know, I removed that top coat I put on there by mistake with either acetone or lacquer thinner, and made sure that the air dry pit filler was still in good shape, and then went back and if you're using a lacquer thinner, you have to also clean it with acetone or solvent alcohol to remove the dust that is left behind, or the film, by the lacquer thinner. And again, the primer is going on the chip on the bottom of the tub. You always want to remember to bring your primer out further than what your color coat is going to come out to. This primer locks itself onto porcelain, so you want it to be out further than the top coat material. That is because if you bring the top coat material out further than your primer, it won't stick to the porcelain. It will come off and you will get a call back, and that will be a loss of money for you. Here I am misting it with water. Lightly misting the primer with water. Same steps as in refinishing. Now here I'm going to be using some lacquer thinner and cleaning out, running that through the airbrush to make sure that I have all the water removed from the fluid lines. Very important step. Your urethanes do not like water, and you go to put that on with water in your line and you're going to have a mess. Going to be applying heat to the primer area that has been misted to dry off the water droplets that are on it. The water begins to cure the primer, which is begins hydrolyzing as soon as it meets air. It begins drawing water out of the air to cure. Now you're adding heat to remove the water mist and to also continue the curing process, because it also is cured with heat, but it cures much faster if water is applied in the form of a mist or high humidity and then heated. Lightly tacking it using no more weight than just the weight of the rag. If you take that primer off, you can look at it against the light and you'll see shiny streaks in it where you rub too hard. That means that you have to put some more primer on. Blowing air on it. Remember, this has a lot of slow or high temp or 85, 95 reducers in it. And, well, all those are the same reducer. But you want to put some on and then blow off the solvents. And then put some more on. Very light coats. And this is why you use a white filler with a white BPO. Or a white filler that uses MEKP, which is clear to begin with. I'm using the reflection of my hand to look and see how the edges are. Now in this spot it really wouldn't be necessary to be perfect, because there's not too many people that's going to get their head back there in the corner and look at it upside down to see how the reflection is off the halo. But I'm sort of a perfectionist, so I like to do every job I do the best I can. And another reason was because the guy that was paying for the job was looking over my shoulder. Same process here on the bottom. Now, since this is on the bottom, I'm not being quite as careful as I was up on the top ledge. You're going to be able to see a little bit of a difference there between the material I applied and the textured spot, but not a whole lot you can do about it. And I've never met anybody that was really concerned about it. Most women would just as soon have that textured bottom removed, because it is as difficult, if not more so, to clean than a tub that has lost its glaze. Now here I am using a further thinned out application of the top coat, or a little bit of primer, or a little bit of blender with a little bit of the color in it to blend in any slight color difference. And always remember to be mindful of where you stopped spraying your primer. You do not want to go out beyond the edge of your primer. I'm using the shadow here to outline the edge of my repair area. I'm just blowing air on it now to help flash off the extra amounts of solvents that are in it in the form of reducers. Now this is cleaning the airbrush. Run through your initial shot of lacquer thinner. And then put the paper towel over the head of the gun to force the airflow down through the fluid tubes. And that's the bubbles you saw in the cup. Take off your cap and uptake tubes and pour your lacquer thinner through the inverted fluid uptake in the gun. Pouring clean unused lacquer thinner back into the bottle. This is a 16-ounce modern round high density polyethylene HDPE. Consolidated Plastics carry now a nylon lined HDPE bottle. It's called a resin barrier, and I have since converted to using only those modern rounds in the resin barrier material from Consolidated. The reason being is that solvents will seep through the walls of an HDPE bottle eventually, and with that nylon in between the two layers, the inside and the outside layer of plastic in the bottle, the resins are kept inside, and there is less seepage of the resins. And I gave up on the 16 ounces, and I'm using just the quart size, the 32-ounce modern round resin barrier plastic bottles from Consolidated now. Now, due to compressors which take air from the ambient environment and compress it, it also takes the water vapors in the air and compresses those. And that water vapor then turns to condensation, as it's compressed in your hose. So I have the hose hanging there with the air just going through it, drying it out. The water filter, which I'm showing you here, the inline filter, will collect air or water droplets in the form of condensation, and I always leave it running to dry it out. And I always carry my mask in 2 layers of plastic. Now for repairs, this mask would probably be adequate for you. But under all other conditions, I recommend that you, fully recommend that you use fresh air supplied respirators. I just put a piece of masking tape up on the back wall, and you'll see why here shortly. There I'm cleaning up any dust or anything else that I've left in the tub, leaving the tub at least as clean as it was when I came in. A lot of times you won't have any problem leaving a tub as clean as it was when you came in, because a lot of times they're going to be pretty rank. I always make up the important notice that tells them when they can use their tub. Put up my little card above that, and there you go with some free advertising and information to the people. Here we have set up in people's bathroom to repair cracks in an acrylic tub shower unit. That is a black grease pencil. You rub it around the area that's cracked, and then you rub it in, and you're going to see where your cracks begin and end. And wherever your cracks end, you're going to want to drill a hole. And by marking them this way, you're going to be able to draw a line between the two, like connect the dots, and that'll show yourself when you start drilling what areas you have to grind out. That way you keep everything at a minimum. Here I'm writing in that is an impact from the rear. Now that is because the material has been pushed inward toward the inside of the tub, and where that little arrow is where the impact was from the rear of the tub. Now that could have been hit with a 2x4, a hammer, the wind could have blown it over when it was at the construction site and it landed on a rock or a piece of wood. It's hard to say. But it happened definitely before the people moved into the house. Here I'm just drilling holes at the end of each of the cracks to stop their continuation. And again, I don't go clear through in a spa, but in a tub shower unit you can go clear through the Gelcoat or acrylic and or the fiberglass backing. It doesn't matter. Actually, it's better to go clear through and then squeeze your filler down through the holes. Now this tub was an innocent blush, and this is a 2-ounce container. I use Nalgene 2-ounce wide mouth containers now, but this is an old one. Innocent blush has been around for quite a while. But I'm going to mix it up now to see before I grind out the damaged area. I'm going to go ahead and get a color match on it. That's because urethane coatings will attack and check acrylic. Now see, I've got that crayon, that black crayon pencil, grease pencil on my finger, so I want to clean that off before I put my finger into the urethane base coating and dissolve all that black grease crayon stuff into the coloring. I'm going to put it off to the side a little bit because I know I'm going to be sanding at least out to there. What I'm doing here is applying heat to the color patch to force dry it because this material does darken as it dries. There are all the colors I carry with me in 2-ounce containers. The China White, I carry 4 ounces of that, or 8 ounces of that, and I carry 4 ounces of pure white. And everything else I'll carry 2 ounces of as far as the colors are concerned. Some of the tints I'll get 4 ounces of and just carry the 4 ounces. I'm getting out the tints and colors that I think I'm going to have to use to push this Innocent Blush around a little bit to get it to match this particular unit. Now, even though it looks like I've got some American Standard bone there, AS bone. Now, every tub unit is going to be different from the colors that you get pre-matched from Diversified Coatings. And that is because if people put up a mauve wallpaper or something with red or green or yellow in it or whatever colors they use in that bathroom is going to be are going to be reflected around the bathroom, and they're going to change the colors of everything else. So there's usually some modifications to color that you have to make on every repair. And again, instead of the 16-ounce Modern Round HDPE, I'm using quart size containers of the Modern Round resin barrier. Well, I haven't switched over to the quart size in the repair tub, and I probably won't, because I wouldn't be able to shut the lid on it with the quart size bottles. I guess I'll be ordering some of these 16-ounce resin barriers. Again, here I'm using an area inside the area that's going to be ground out for my color matching process. Now, once an area has been sanded, you cannot, in Gelcoat or acrylic, you cannot use that as a color matching area because it's going to be lighter. You have to use an unsanded, unabraded area for matching. That's why I'm sticking so close to the repair area here on acrylic. Adding a drop of black, perhaps 2 drops here. Looks as though I'm going to add a little bit of orange tint. Back to the color matching board. Using acetone to clean off the color chip matching patches. It also has a secondary effect of removing the grease pencil marks. Ran out of room. There you can see the cracks show up very nicely, and I had to make more room for more color patches. Evidently found another crack, or that one had extended out further than I thought. Now I'm going to route out each of the cracks, rubbing off the melted up little nubs of acrylic as I go. Another way that this could be done is just go out to your vehicle and get your close quarter drill, or whatever drill it is that you use for grinding and so on. Put on your 3-inch disc with holder with the 3-inch discs of 36 or 24 grip, and just grind this whole area down between the dots with your 3-inch disc. I'm putting on a coarse sanding drum. I only use the coarse drums. And with this, I'm going to use that to fair out the cracks. Make them wider so the fill has something to sit on. Do that around the holes and each side of the crack. Here I'm both lowering and scuffing up the area between the cracks. And again, not making the area any larger than absolutely necessary. Here I'm using more than likely 80 grit to put some heavy-duty teeth marks or scratch marks in the area to which I want to apply the filler. In this case, going out to the van, bringing in the drill, setting it up, putting on the 3-inch holder with the 24 or 36-inch grit or 36 grit disc would take about as much time and effort as this method. If this would have been much larger or a different shape, perhaps with the same area, I would have gotten the drill. This is just a borderline judgment call here in doing it with the Dremel or the 3-inch disc on the close quarter drill. Going to clean it off with acetone. This is acrylic. You use acetone only for cleaning until you get ready to put the top coat on. Then you clean with solvent alcohol, 100% isopropyl alcohol. Again, being careful to stay within the area that was prepared for the filler, so I don't have to do a lot of extra sanding and top coating, and making sure that I press the filler down through the holes and into the routed out area, and leveling it as much as possible. You will have to go over something like this again with your fill-in glaze. cleaning any excess filler off, keeping that area as small as possible. Applying heat to accelerate the curing process, holding it at an angle so the solvents can more easily blossom out of the fill without causing solvent pops. Still picking up a little white tack on my finger and continuing the heating and drying process, curing. Okay, wetting it down and sanding it with 80 grit, perhaps even 60 grit. All I want to do here is knock it down, level it out. Doesn't matter how rough it is because I'm going to have to go over it at least one more time with the fill-in glaze. Keeping that paper wet and thereby clean, it's going to be much easier to sand. You can use a flat sand on something this size. That's that little rubber thing that you wrap your wet and dry paper around and hold it in your palm. That keeps your sanding area flatter than you will by using your fingers and hands as I'm doing here, but I've got quite a bit of experience doing this. This is the fill-in glaze. Since I'm going to be using a color other than white, I can use a colored BPO. Also, having a slight color difference will allow me to see the high spots and low spots. Same as in a bottom job. I go around the edges. I will put more pressure on the outside edge of the spreader than I do on the inside, and that'll help level out the outside edge of the filling material. And again, taking acetone, cleaning it down to the bare minimum. You want to keep your sanding scratches covered with fill, but you don't want to have to make that area any whiter than necessary. Accelerating the curing process with heat at an angle. Here I'm using the 3M sanding pad with 120 to take the tack off the fill-in glaze, and using it of course with water. Now, using the 120, I'm going to be breaking through the tacky surface on the fill-in glaze. If I used anything finer, it would fill up the paper way too fast. You can experiment with it and you'll see. On something this size, you could also use your finish sander. Whether you have the orbital finish sander or the ROS in the big size or the ROS in the small palm-held size. Both of those are made by Porter Cable. A regular finishing sander, I'd recommend getting something other than a Black & Decker. I'd go with a Milwaukee or a name that just get an oscillating finishing sander with the highest number of oscillations per minute. drying the area off and cleaning it with acetone. I prefer to use acetone after there's been water on it because acetone helps remove water. This is the pit filler, the air dry pit filler number 29 by AdTech. This dries so fast that sometimes you get more on there than you want to just because you're working against time. In a case like that, you could use 220 to start out over the heavy spots, but use it very lightly, and do not use water when you sand the air dry pit filler. Always sand the air dry pit filler dry. Now again, this size of a repair is somewhere in between doing the sanding by hand and doing it with a finishing sander. Either way you go here, it'd work out to be just about the same. With the finishing sander, your area that you need to put a finish coat on would be larger than this area is, but it wouldn't take as long to sand as it does to sand it by hand. And by hand, you can keep your area that you need to top coat to a minimum. Here I'm cleaning it with solvent alcohol. That is a rule that you must follow. Always clean acrylic with solvent alcohol, 100% isopropyl alcohol. I'm cleaning up all the dust on this acrylic unit because acrylic is real shiny, and it has a tendency to attract static electricity or build up static electricity, which will give you problems in top coating it using any kind of a spray on it. One thing I don't worry about too much is drying off the acrylic completely. If there's a little water left on it, then there's not going to be as much static electricity in there. And again, here I'm going over it with some solvent alcohol again to make sure that water is taken out, getting the area around the repair very clean in preparation for top coating. You do not need to prime this. As long as you stay within the area that you sanded with no more coarse grit than 320, and since we use the pit filler on top, then it's been sanded with 400. As long as you do not go outside of your sanding area with your top coating material, you do not need to prime this. Your top coating material will stick to 400 or 320 grit sanding marks or scratches. Again, this is the little WR brown compressor, but I fully recommend that you follow the instructions in your inventory and get the larger one by Dayton. Now, since I pre-matched the color here, I do not have to go through that process now. Add the proper amount of top coat converter or activator, and your again, this is something that you're going to want to use the slow or high temp or 85-95 reducer in. Use quite a bit of it. This is acrylic. It's like porcelain. It's very shiny. You want to have that edge melted in very evenly. And there goes the reducer. You see, I don't measure that. I just dump it in. Okay, now this is the anti-stat that's in your inventory. And you're going to, what you do with that is just spray it on at full atomization around the repair area. And crystal tacks, the crystal tack is the best tack cloth, but I suggest that you use now the base coat, clear coat tack cloths that are available at your local PB&E. They're usually blue in color. Now, the more you tack acrylic, the more you rub that acrylic with that tack cloth, the more static electricity you're going to build up. Now, this is your anti-stat. You can see I'm putting it on at full force, full atomization, blowing it all around the repair, on the repair. I want to decrease the chances of static electricity building up and drawing in any overspray, making it necessary for me to wipe it off and possibly ruin a good blending job. I ran all the anti-stat out of the gun, and then I just put it in the color and shot it at the waste can until the color came out, and this is the application of the colored top coat material. Always keep your gun moving, never release the trigger, never apply the trigger without the gun being in motion. And I found that taking circular movements with the brush keeps the gun in motion, and it's easier to cover the area than trying to go from side to side or up and down in straight lines. Again, I keep the gun pointed toward the center as much as possible of the repair area because I don't want to have the top coat material blowing out across the rest of the tub where it has more of a tendency to be drawn by the static electricity into the acrylic and adhere to the acrylic as a sandy feeling coating of dust. Working on taking the color out a little ways. Now you're going to come out with your blending area beyond your sanding area, or the area that you sanded, and that's okay. Don't worry about that. You want the main portion of your top coat where it is thick to be within the area that you sanded, right out to the very edge of it. I'm blowing air on it, which I've done a couple of times so far, blossoming off the solvent, keeping it from running and sagging, because remember, you have a lot of reducer in this material. hand is up there. I'm checking out the reflections to see how smooth it is, to see if there's any runs or sags. There, I'm checking it out to see what it looks like under the natural light. There, I put a paper towel over the cap of the gun to push the material back down into the blender that I've poured in there. Now you can experiment with your mid-temp and your high-temp as a material to melt in the edges with, but you'll find most of the time that the repair blender, your Centauri 1700S or Diversified Coatings repair blender will work best. But do be careful, it's a lot thinner than your top coating material. It comes out a lot faster, and just be a little slower with it. Add a little more air to it. You want it to atomize as much as possible, but you don't want to put it on very heavy. But due to the slight color difference here, what you saw me doing with the paper towel over the point of the gun was dumping the color that was in the gun into the repair blender. And so I'm putting a weaker color on the outside edges of this repair to blend it in to make the difference, any differences, less noticeable than they would have been otherwise. When you're talking about a $800–900 tub here that's in a very expensive home that cannot be taken out of the home without being cut up, a smaller multi-piece tub put in here that doesn't have a cap on it, the dome on it, these people are very interested in having a good job done on this. Now the back wall repairs are harder than any other repair because they're at eye level. People have their curtains open on their tubs. They want to show that expensive tub off. And that back wall repair better be good. You'll get paid for a little while doing bad repairs, but all of a sudden you're going to find out that you don't have any repair work coming in unless you do excellent work, unless you make sure that your customer is satisfied. There. Blend it in. I'm force drying the edges a little bit. I want to work that outside edge of the halo with the heat gun. Do not put a lot of heat to this top coating material, 140 degrees. Keep that gun moving because it's at 600 degrees on low. There is my little bottle of Meguiar's No. 7 Seal-In Glaze. What I am going to do is take a little bit of that and wipe it around the edges of the repair area where the halo is to minimize the visual or the visible halo around the repair. Working on gel coat, this step wouldn't be necessary. Gel coat is so much simpler to repair than acrylic. It's unbelievable. But with acrylics, you have to watch your halos the same as you do with porcelain. You do not want to get this ceiling glaze in toward the thicker material where it is not cured yet. That outside edge was melted and blended, and it is dry now. You do not, repeat, do not go in too far, or you will just have to remove all your top coating work and start over again. Lightly buffing it back out. Cleaning the airbrush, putting that paper towel over the front of the gun and forcing the fluid that's in the gun and in the fluid tubes back out, blowing more fluid through it, forcing the fluid back, taking the uptake cap off and hose off and inverting the gun and dumping the lacquer thinner into the uptake tube. Making sure that everything's cleaned off from the air cap on the gun and the nozzle. Taking out the needle, cleaning that off. Taking the reamer and putting that through the airbrush where the needle goes, making sure you scrape anything off the inside of that area with the reamer. Putting a drop of gun lube on the needle. That cap protects your needle during transportation. Filling out the notice. When can the customer use this tub again? And putting down a thanks, signing your name to it. There's your repaired area. Looks nice and shiny, color matched. Only a person who knew where that damage was and looks very closely will see that repair.